Hello everyone, hope you all are good and hope that you have started with chapter 5, the previous lecture that we had about the same chapter. We have understood about gross profit ratio from chapter 5, which is accounting ratios and analysis. It is given on page number 210 in your textbook, part 2 of course. We have started this lecture in the previous lecture itself. We have started this chapter in previous lecture after finishing chapter 2 from part 2. Yes? And as I said, the weightage of this chapter is overall 8 marks, 2 MCQ, 2 VSQ and a 4-mark question. And the entire chapter revolves around the formulas. There are various formulas that you need to understand and then memorize and apply it in practical sums. Yes, out of which we have solved gross profit ratio in previous lecture. We have done illustrations, that is 1, 2 and 3, also 4th. And question number 4 consisting of 3 sums in it from exercise. And in today's lecture, we are going to start with the second profitability ratio, which is operating ratio. Right? There are 4 profitability ratios: gross profit ratio, operating ratio, operating profit ratio, net profit ratio. We have finished gross profit ratio in previous lecture. And in today's lecture, we are going to start with the second profitability ratio, which is operating ratio. What is operating ratio? The meaning, first of all, is given on page number 218. You can use your textbook, either you can pay attention to the screen. Operating ratio discloses the relation of operating cost and sales. See, in the very first lecture, we have understood the definition. Definition says that accounting ratio is relationship between two accounting figures. So which are the two accounting figures here? It is the relation between operating cost and sales. Operating ratio is cost-based ratio. This ratio shows proportion of operating cost to sales. So firstly, what is operating cost? It is COGS, that is cost of goods sold. COGS, we have understood this. We have learned formula for obtaining this while understanding gross profit ratio. Yes? How to obtain cost of goods sold is given in lecture 1. This is the second lecture for chapter 5. So we are talking about operating cost. What is operating cost? It is cost of goods sold plus operating expenses. We already know what is COGS and how to find it. Now we are going to talk about operating expenses, which is a new thing here. So they've explained what are operating expenses. Operating expenses are those expenses which are incurred for operating activities of business, where office expense, administrative expense, sales distribution expenses, employees benefit expenses, depreciation, amount written off, etc. are included. You need to highlight the points that are highlighted by me here. And you will also write down the formula of operating cost first. See, what you are supposed to do is you will give heading, operating ratio. Then firstly you will write down operating cost equals to COGS plus operating expenses. What is COGS? We already know. What are operating expenses? It is given in the first, second and third line. Operating expenses are those expenses which are incurred for operating activities of business. Which expenses are included here? administrative expenses, sales distribution, employee benefit, and depreciation, amount written off, etc. You need to memorize this. You already know what are administrative expenses, sales and distribution expenses. We have understood this while understanding the profit and loss account in final accounts. All the expenses are mentioned on debit side of profit and loss account. Yes? Okay. You have a note below. Non-operating incomes like interest received, dividend received, profit on sale of asset are not considered during determination of operating cost. So let it be. We are just supposed to consider operating expenses, and which are operating expenses that we have understood. So there is no need of going in detail with other points. Quickly coming towards the formula of operating ratio. Formula: operating ratio equals to COGS plus operating expenses upon net sales into 100. You may please write down this formula. The formula for operating ratio is COGS. Obviously, you know how to find out COGS. We have understood this at the time of gross profit ratio. Plus operating expenses, that we have understood here. The point that is highlighted here. Upon net sales, we already know what net sales is. It is sales minus sales return. Alright, what is the objective? What is trend? You will read on your own. We are moving towards the practical sums. That is illustration 5. Yes? Illustration 5, we are going to start from chapter 5, which is based on operating ratio, and illustration 5 is given on page number 219. The question says COGS equals to 4,80,000, operating expenses 1,20,000, financial expenses 1 lakh, sales 8 lakh. Okay, everything is given here. What is the formula for operating ratio? It is COGS plus operating expense upon net sales into 100. The formula that we have understood here, we have learned here. The question says find out operating ratio, and we have written the formula. Now we'll substitute the necessary figures and we'll obtain the answer. COGS is 4,80,000 as given in the question, plus operating expenses again 1,20,000 as given in the question, upon net sales 8 lakh into 100. This calculation gives you the answer, which is 75%. Operating ratio is profitability ratio. This ratio is also presented in terms of percentage. That means you are supposed to write down, you are supposed to put a sign of percentage besides the answer. The question here is that why I did not consider financial expenses. Because financial expenses are not a part of operating expenses. Operating expenses includes only administrative, sales and distribution, employee benefit expenses, depreciation, and amount written off. Yes? Here also, before the formula you can see, interest expense is financial expense, not an operating expense. So in short, what I'm trying to say is that financial expenses are not a part of operating expenses, and hence financial expenses rupees 1 lakh given in this illustration is not to be considered at the time of calculation of operating ratio. and we have obtained the answer 75%. And the illustration is complete. Moving towards the next illustration, illustration 6 given on same page. From the given information of K and Company Limited, calculate operating ratios of 2 years. The data of 2 years is presented 2016, 2017. I will explain about 2016. The same explanation with proper understanding you will apply to the data of 2017 and you will obtain the answer. We are supposed to calculate operating ratio. So firstly, what do we need? COGS. Is it given? Yes, it is clearly given for 2016. I can see the second item itself mentioned in the column of particulars in question, not answer. It is 7,50,000. COGS is given. Then we need operating expenses. Then we need sales. Sales is the very first item mentioned, 15 lakh. COGS 7,50,000. So the only thing that I require is operating expenses now. So operating expenses, what is included in it? The calculation of operating expenses is given in the table below the question. Yes, for 2016, administrative expense 1 lakh, sales expense 2,50,000, depreciation 1 lakh, and the total is 4,50,000. These three items are to be included in calculation of operating expense as per this point, the one that is highlighted here. All these expenses I have considered, and the items other than this, financial expenses, income, other expenses, they are of no use. Because in operating expenses only administrative, sales and depreciation is to be calculated. So these three items have been considered, and operating expenses for the year 2016 is 4,50,000. So now putting all these figures in the formula. The formula is COGS plus operating expense upon net sales into 100. COGS for the year 2016, 7,50,000 plus 4,50,000 the operating expenses that we have calculated upon sales. What is sales? 15 lakh. I can see in the question. And the answer is 80%. Yes. And the answer for the year 2017 is 72.5%. Operating ratio is calculated on the basis of operating expenses. So the decreasing trend of this ratio discloses increase in profit because it shows reduction in expenses. Okay? And you will also understand once you will read this theory. See, the decreasing trend is favorable. अगर ये ratio का आंसर decreasing trend में है, then it is beneficial. Yeah? Because it is cost based ratio. Obviously, if my ratio is 80% and now it is 72.5%, it is beneficial. Ultimately, it indicates decrease in cost somewhere. Yes? Fine, then you will solve this illustration. Talking about the next illustration, that is illustration 7, given on the very next page, page number 220. From the following information of S Limited, calculate operating ratio. Yes. Sales is given, sorry, 28 lakh. COGS is readily given 18 lakh. Salary, other administrative expense, etc., etc. is given. So again, one thing is clear here, that we are supposed to calculate operating expenses. What is the formula for operating ratio? It is COGS plus operating expenses upon net sales into 100. We need to have three items: COGS, operating expense, net sales, out of which COGS is given, sales is given. We are obtaining operating expenses now, which is given after the formula. It says operating expenses equals to salary 1,20,000, administrative expense 1,80,000, sales expense 1,50,000, and operating expenses is 4,50,000. So many expenses are given in the question, starting from salary. We have to choose the expenses belonging to operating expenses. Yes? Administrative expenses is clear, it is to be taken. Sales expense is to be taken. We've also taken salary here. Why? Salary, because salary comes under the heading of employees' benefit expenses. Yes? That is the reason salary has been considered here. Yes? Interest on loan is financial expense, not to be taken. Loss due to fire is not to be taken. Interest income is not to be taken, not to be considered. Yes? So what you are supposed to consider while calculating operating expenses is salary, administrative expense, sales expense. No other expense. So this way 4,50,000 is operating expenses. Now putting all the figures in the formula, COGS 18 lakh plus operating expense 4,50,000 upon net sales 28 lakh into 100 gives you 80.36%. Operating ratio is to be presented in terms of percentage. Alright? So this completes illustration 7. Yes? We have done illustration 5, then 6, then 7. In illustration 6, we have understood only about 2016. For 2017, you will understand on your own, you will calculate it. Then we have done illustration 7, and now we are going to do a sum related to operating ratio given in your exercise. Yes, this sum is given on page number 247 in exercise. We have solved question 4, which consists of 3 short sums in it. They were related to gross profit ratio. And now that we have understood about operating ratio, the sum related to operating ratio we are going to solve. Yes? So the information is given here. Non-operating other expenses, depreciation, administrative expense, sales, tax rate, income of interest dividend, sales expense, COGS, financial expense. The very first question in your mind, what is the formula for operating ratio? Yes? So if you are having a writing book right now, is best you can start writing. Firstly, you will write down the formula, or else if you remember the formula, write down the content. Obviously, the formula for operating ratio is COGS plus operating expense upon sales into 100. So the very first thing that I'm going to find in this question is what? COGS. So COGS is 3,25,000. See, it is written. The very first thing written in the answer is COGS. 3,25,000 as given in the question. Then sales is also given here. See, 6 lakh. The amount of sales is given 6 lakh rupees. Which is the next thing I require? It is operating expenses. What is included in operating expenses? Administrative, sales expense, depreciation, employee benefit expense, amount written off. Out of that, from this question, the things to be considered while calculating operating expense is, I can see depreciation, then administrative expense, then sales expense. Only that much. So, operating expenses have been calculated here. You can see 75,000 plus 52,000 plus 48,000. Operating expenses is 1,75,000. Why we did not consider other things? Because operating expenses includes only this much items. Non-operating other expenses are not considered. Tax is not considered. Income of interest dividend is not considered. Financial expenses is also not considered at the time of calculating operating expenses. So now, once we are available with everything, let us substitute the necessary figures and obtain the answer. So operating ratio equals to COGS 3,25,000 plus operating expenses 1,75,000 as per our calculation, upon sales 6 lakh as given in the question in 200, and the answer obtained from this calculation is 83.33%. Answer is to be mentioned in terms of percentage. You can please check this answer in your textbook at the end, where all the answers for exercise are given of all the chapters. Yes? So as per me, operating ratio and its calculation and its understanding was extremely easy. Yes? What we have done in today's lecture, let us quickly have an overview. Firstly, this is the second lecture for chapter 5 from part 2. In first lecture, we have understood about gross profit ratio. In today's lecture, we have understood about operating ratio. The second profitability ratio, we have started with that. The meaning, formula and necessary explanation is given on page number 218. What are operating expenses? What is operating cost? We have understood. You will write down the formula of operating cost. You will write down the point that has been highlighted about operating expenses. Then you will write down the formula of operating ratio. Based on that, we have solved illustration 5, extremely easy and simple. Further, illustration 6, consisting of the data of 2 years. Then illustration 7, finally a sum related to operating ratio from exercise. And this is the solution of that sum. And this is your homework for today. So that's all. We'll see you in the next lecture with the next profitability ratio, that is operating profit ratio. Till then, stay home, stay safe, study well.